Now think for a second, what does organic mean to you? Now it could mean many things. It could be no pesticides, no herbicides, all natural from the earth. It could mean carbon-based. And in biology, we're going to talk about organic molecules as those molecules that are carbon-based molecules and those that are going to be the basis for life on Earth and the basis for this class, biology. Everything you do, everything you eat, is to get nutrients in the form of carbon in some way or another. Ultimately, we need water, food, and air. And we need a few other things too, like sleep and minerals. Alright? Look on the right here. This is a picture of DNA. This is a picture of the DNA of a strawberry. Here we have a picture of what DNA looks like when you look in its molecular form. Alright? And ultimately, this watermelon over here has tons of DNA and other organic molecules that are important for life. Now, it's important to understand the hierarchy of things. The smallest unit of an element that displays the properties of that element is called an atom. All right? When you add atoms together, you get molecules. When you add molecules together, you get macromolecules. When you add those together, they make up organelles, which are these things that make up cells, which are cells made of organelles are the most fundamental living unit of biology. Cells then make up tissues like the skin and muscles, the nervous system. And then you get organs, which are made of tissues. Okay? And then many organs make up an organ system, okay, like the digestive system. And organ systems make up organisms. Alright? So it all starts with carbon, but why carbon? Why use carbon? Why is carbon the basis of life and not anything else? Well, carbon is stable, for one thing. Carbon doesn't have that much electronegativity. For example, if you look at the oxygen atom, oxygen is generally always a polar molecule whenever you see it. That means it has partial positive and partial negative, and that is because it likes to pull electrons stronger than the things it binds to, especially hydrogen. Another reason why carbon is important is because it's abundant. It's all over the place. It's everywhere. Why would life be made of something that is not abundant or something that's scarce? Carbon has 4 valence electrons, meaning that it can make 4 bonds with other things. This allows it to be very diverse in structure. And this diversity in structure leads to the diversity of organisms that we see all over the earth today. And another important thing about carbon is that form meets function. All right? Carbon structures don't exist randomly. Carbon structures exist because they have a specific function in an organism. Okay? What you're looking at here are a bunch of different forms, a bunch of different structures that carbon can take. Here we have a ring structure. Here we have a triple bond straight chain. Here now we have a double bond straight chain form. Here we have a branched structure. Okay, and here we have just simple carbon with 4 hydrogens. So carbon, when bonded to hydrogen and not anything else, we just call it a hydrocarbon. All right, hydrocarbons really are the basis for everything because carbon is usually bonded to hydrogen if not bonded to something else. Okay, so the first major rule of carbon-based structures is that form meets function. Okay, the different structures that carbon can take lead to the different roles that it may play in the functioning of an organism or in the cell. Okay. Now, if you look at these trees here, all right, this is the redwoods in the Redwood National Forest in Northern California. All right, these redwoods have a multitude of carbon-based structures. The entire tree is made of carbon, first of all. If you can guess what carbon that is, and answer it in class the next day, all right, you might have to bring it up because I'm going to forget. Then I'll give you an extra point on your next test if you can answer where the carbon of this tree comes from. All right, but the carbon where this tree comes from, the carbon structures take on many different forms to serve many different roles, whether it be leaves or plants or sugars or roots or anything like that. Carbon needs to take many different roles in order for the functioning of an organism. All right. So what makes one carbon different from another? If we go back here, one of the things is structure. All right. And another thing, all right, is the even more exaggerated structures that they could take. So we're still focusing on structure here. All right. Here what you're looking at is two ringed carbon structures. All right, this is what they look like. It's called limonene. All right, now one of them, all right, limonene positive and limonene negative. All right, really these two things are taking on two different forms. If you look here, all right, you have a double bond to the left here, and here the double bond is to the right. Okay, this is actually very important because one of the differences between these, one of them, limonene plus, the isomer, takes on a lemon smell. The other one, limonene minus, takes on a more turpentine smell. All right. So these two things, they have the same structural formula, all right, or the same chemical formula but different structure, are called isomers. All right. So isomers are molecules that have the same chemical formula but different structure, and these structures allow the molecule itself to have many different characteristics, one of them being how it smells or how it volatilizes in the air. All right. If we move over here to the right, we're looking at two carbon-based structures. All right. Both of them have carbon, both of them have hydrogen, both of them have oxygen. All right. But if you notice, their structures are completely different. All right. This one is a ring structure, and this one is kind of a straight chain and branch structure. Mostly straight chain, but it's got a little branching over here. So molecules can have more than one of these structures, but usually molecules take on one or the other of the structures. They're either straight chained, they're either branched, they're either ring, and they may or may not have a double bond. So those are the four different structures that molecules can take. This molecule here is called a fatty acid. All right, it doesn't like water, first of all, and you notice, all right, these long chains things. This is used for energy. This is for energy consumption. All of these hydrogens here, once we release one of these hydrogens, we're gonna obtain energy from those things. All right. Over here, this molecule is used for energy on a smaller scale, but it's also used to move around the bloodstream. It is actually taken in by cells, whereas this one here, all right, is actually going to be broken down extracellularly most often. And it's actually used for energy storage. So this one's energy storage, and this one is the traveling of energy throughout the human system, or the system of a plant, or any animal, or a fungus. Okay. So what can differ besides the structure of a carbon-based arrangement of molecules? The second thing that can differ besides structure is the functional group. All right. Now, these functional groups are the most important thing you can learn in this unit, and it's one of those things that you really just need to know. You need to understand what the functional groups are. You need to understand if they act as acids or bases. You also need to understand if they are hydrophilic or hydrophobic. And we're going to go through those right now. The hydroxyl group is a very common functional group. It most often resides in carbohydrates. All right. Let me back up for a second. A functional group is a group of atoms, all right, or a arrangement of atoms that reacts in very predictable ways. All right. And because each functional group reacts in predictable ways, when you put these functional groups on carbon structures, the carbon structures that you put them on will act very similarly to the functional groups that you put on them. For example, if you notice on this molecule here, this ring structure molecule, it's actually called glucose. It has a bunch of hydroxyl groups. The hydroxyl groups are hydrophilic. And remember that they're hydrophilic because the oxygen has a greater pull for electrons when it's with hydrogen. So this is going to be a polar molecule, so it is going to interact with water. Alright, so hydroxyl groups, when carbon is bonded to oxygen bonded to hydrogen, is going to be hydrophilic, and it will actually tend to release this hydrogen into solution. And we know that anything that releases hydrogen into solution will be an acid or act as an acid. Okay. A carbonyl structure is a slightly polar molecule as well. It's not going to donate or accept hydrogens, although it will slightly bind to a hydrogen in solution, so we do call it slightly acidic. But the carbonyl is generally a very stable molecule, and molecules that have many carbonyls, that portion will be a very stable portion of the carbon arrangement. If we move on to the carboxyl group, a carboxyl group is a carbonyl with a hydroxyl group all together. So this carboxyl group tends to release this hydrogen into solution, and because of that is known as an acid. It also tends to interact with water, so we call it hydrophilic. Carboxyl groups are often found in proteins. Carbonyls are often found in lipids. Hydroxyl groups are often found in carbohydrates, although you can find all of them in almost anything. If we move down to an amino group, nitrogen has a very, very strong pull for electrons, and as a result it tends to accept a third hydrogen, making it a base because it takes hydrogens out of solution. Alright, the amino group is a hydrophilic group. It most often occurs on proteins. It'll occur on a lot of other things too. And it is one of the building blocks to making up proteins. So the amino group acts as a base. It is hydrophilic, and it commonly occurs on proteins. The phosphate group, this one you're going to have to star here. The phosphate group is a hydrophilic charged molecule. All right, it's very reactive. When you see a phosphate group, generally you're going to have a reactive molecule, as in ATP, which we're going to talk about later, which is adenosine triphosphate. It also occurs in DNA, and in this example of DNA, it actually acts as stability. But one important thing you should know about the phosphate is that it is a reactive molecule, and it is hydrophilic molecule. As you notice, all of these negative charges here, this is going to add instability to many of the molecules that it resides in. So what you should know is that if I were to take a hydrocarbon, if we go back here, methane, and I were to put hydroxyl groups all around it, I would make I would make methane, or it wouldn't be methane anymore, but I would make it hydrophilic. When carbon is just bonded to hydrogen, not anything else, it's called hydrophobic because this is very stable. The carbon and hydrogen share electrons equally. There's no polarity, so it's not going to interact with water. All right. So if you were to guess this molecule here, if this would be hydrophobic or hydrophilic, you'd probably guess it would be hydrophobic because there aren't any oxygens attached. There isn't any nitrogen, and there aren't any phosphates. So when carbon is bonded just to hydrogen, it's usually going to be hydrophobic. Over here, their functional groups are the hydroxyl groups. You're going to see that this molecule is going to be hydrophilic when put in an aqueous solution. Some additional functional groups are the methyl group, which is this carbon bonded to 3 hydrogens bonded to other carbons. This group here, CH3, is very similar to the methane group here, although it's going to be bonded to another carbon. So let's see, this is a methyl group here. Methyl groups are very hydrophobic. They're very unreactive in water. And another one is the sulfhydryl. The sulfhydryl tends to bond polypeptides together. You're probably not sure what those are yet, but they're very important in how molecules attach to one another. So functional groups, have a really good understanding of these functional groups because they're going to play a huge role in every single thing that we do from here on out. For the next probably 7 or 8 weeks, you're going to be having to recognize and understand functional groups in many different ways. So it's important that you get these down, and we'll try to help you with that. All right. Another major thing that we need to understand is that oftentimes molecules are arranged singularly, meaning the molecule itself acts alone, And other times, molecules will bind to other molecules to form larger structures. Okay, so a set of molecules that is arranged in a specific way, a molecule that's arranged in a specific way is called a monomer. All right, and here we have something called a monomer. This is a very common form of carbons and hydrogens and oxygens arranged like this. Is called glucose. All right, and then we have something called a polymer, which is when many of these things, many monomers, are added onto one another, they create larger structures called polymers. Now, how do we get polymers together? All right, is called dehydration synthesis. So, in order for us to get this monomer and add it to another monomer, we have to carry out a reaction, and this reaction is called a dehydration reaction. Dehydration reactions often occur, or almost always occur, between two hydroxyl groups of something, but they don't always. It could be a hydroxyl group and an amino group. It could be a hydroxyl group and a hydroxyl group. It could be a hydroxyl group and a carboxyl group. But often there will be some sort of hydroxyl group involved with some other hydrogen. And if you notice here, these two hydroxyl groups are on the same plane. They're both occurring down. Okay, because if this one was occurring up and this one was down, then one of these molecules would have to flip, and we're going to talk about that. But basically, what we're going to do, if you can see water in here, HO or HHO. You see H2O in there. What you're going to end up with is the water will be removed. It's called dehydration when you remove water. All right, and we leave the leftover oxygen to bind the two molecules together. Now, another reaction is called the hydration reaction. If we want to break this bond here to split these molecules up, all right, it's called hydrolysis or hydrolysis, using water to lyse or to break something. We can add a water molecule back in and then come back to this form with two separate monomers.